Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Dark Reading News Desk, coming to you live from Black Hat 2023. My name is Becky Bracken. I'm an editor with Dark Reading, and I am here to welcome Karim Toubba, CEO of LastPass. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Becky.
Really appreciate you joining us. Now, while it's not necessary to belabor the past, but you came on following the LastPass breach.
Yep.
And so I'm really interested to get your thoughts on what that time period after has been like and what a CEO needs to do to recover from something like this.
Yeah, I came on board right before the breach, actually about 2 months before the initial breach happened. So
Oh.
I came on board in May of 22. We announced the initial breach in August
Understood.
of 22. So
Apologies.
yeah, it was an interesting surprise to say the least. But you know, the best way to think about it is there's sort of two periods, right?
Okay.
During the incident, if you will, until you officially close the incident, and then post the incident. During the incident, it's a lot of work around incident response, getting the right information out to the public, and then having sort of clear pillars and strategies around what you want to put out there, right? And we were very clear from the initial period that we felt like we needed to be pretty transparent about what had occurred. We wanted to follow that up with what we were doing in that moment and then what we were doing post the incident after it was closed. So we put out a pretty extensive blog, about 5 pages. It was about 17, 18 subpages. In some ways, probably a lot more than most other organizations that have been through this. We felt it was necessary, partly because we're part of the security community. And partly it's just sort of the DNA, the people that I brought in with me that have been in cyber pretty much their entire career. Post the incident, and by the way, one other thing that's also important during the incident is that as a CEO, you sort of have to, you do all the things that you would expect, which is work with the security team to really understand the impact, work with the teams that are focused on the customer, but you have to also manage the communications, you have to manage board expectations.
Yes.
And that's really important. I was fortunate to bring on board a couple of months after, or a few months after I started, a board member as an independent, John Stewart, who was the Senior Vice President of Cyber and Trust at Cisco for many years, who I'd worked with in the past, who came on board as an independent. That was invaluable because that creates the right kind of dynamic to ensure that we're striking the right balance in terms of being transparent and disclosing the right information, but having another voice in the boardroom who's a cybersecurity expert other than myself, navigating the communication with the board and what we were going through. And those kinds of things are extremely important to manage up at the board level as a CEO, but also down into the organization. Because remember, you also have a sales force, you have a marketing team that wants to understand, should I market in the middle of this type of activity or should I hold off on specific campaigns? You have a sales force that you can then re-marshal, which is what we did, to actually go out to existing customers, because for a period of time, you're not going after new for the first couple of months. So you engage those people to go out to existing customers to make sure you're getting the right information out there and giving them everything that they need.
How many of these decisions, sort of about transparency and being as forthcoming as possible, how many of these decisions were made prior to the incident, or how many of these decisions were made sort of in the heat after the incident? I'm just interested in if there, a lot of people, a lot of companies will have like a response playbook, but not necessarily understand sort of the philosophical pillars about why they're doing things.
Yeah.
Were those discussions had before?
Yeah, well, they weren't had before because I'd only been there a couple of months.
Understood.
They typically are part of the process of this, of structuring a communication plan, a crisis communication plan as a whole. But generally what you do is you talk in broad strokes about transparency, but it's important to really sort of take the time to define what that actually means.
That is a good point.
Right. So we did that as we went through the process. And, you know, you oftentimes in business and life, you sort of have these guiding principles. You know, we got beat up, I think fairly so, during the communication path because we didn't release information fast enough. And I think that was fair criticism. But when we had the full information, we said, look, one of the guiding principles is full transparency of what happened and what we did. And as a result, we decided to lean into that pretty heavily. And most of our business customers really sort of appreciated that. I think one of the most interesting comments, I've met with probably close to 300 customers. One of the most interesting and consistent comments I heard was, look, we're not going to judge you by necessarily what happened. We're going to judge you by what you do. after. And so, how seriously are you taking this? What are the changes that you're making? What investments are you making moving forward? Are you enacting policy changes in addition to investments in cyber? And does it have staying power, right? And I think those are the things that really ultimately the market measures you on.
I've had dozens of conversations about incident response and dozens of conversations about the role of the CEO, which
Yeah.
is sort of a vague thing. But that's, you talk about communication with the board, communication with, the marketing team and all of this. Who do you have in the bunker with you? Who are because it seems to me, and most people have outlined, this is a series of split-second decisions
Yeah.
that a lot of the future hangs upon. So how are you making those quick decisions, and who are you leaning on to inform those decisions?
Yeah. So there are multiple constituents around the table that are really critical. I will start with your head of technology and security. I was super fortunate, maybe a month after I started, to bring on board a gentleman that I'd worked with in the past, Christopher Hoff, who's very well known in security circles, and who I had worked with before. And that he was really, in many ways, he and I would go back and forth in terms of both understanding the technical details of the incident, but just as importantly, what our response should be, both tactically/technically, but also from a communication perspective. And that was invaluable because he is really sort of spearheading the response and is the source of truth for what happened technically and how we're responding. In addition to that, of course, you have to navigate and communicate as a CEO to your board. Depending on the profile, as you and I have talked about this in the past, there was a high profile nature of this breach. So there was a lot of interest and opinions and point of views with the board. So there's a fair bit of communication that has to go on there. And then within that bunker also are people that are representing communications that can really sort of give you a sense of how, where, and when to communicate. Part of that is about looking at historical incidents and what's worked and what's not and how we can adjust, but also the vehicles. We have a SaaS app. Should you be communicating in-app to customers?
Wow.
Should you be communicating in email? Should you be communicating in blog? And the communication path, along with legal, along with the security and tech team, are really sort of the pillars that help you drive the right decision.
Well, thank you for that insight, because that is invaluable for us to, to just talk about these things rather than actually have to do it. So now that you are, this is well behind you, and where do you assess where you are in your recovery now with your customers and with their trust?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, we took quite a bit of time to make some investments to rebuild trust with the broader market at large and our customers specifically. And we did that through something called Trust Center, where we published a lot of this information, but continue to publish what are changes in our policies, what are we doing from a compliance perspective, and what does our security stack look like, and how is it continuously evolving, as all policies and security stacks should in the fullness of time, whether you had an incident or not. So we direct a lot of people that have questions to that. It's a living and breathing site. The other thing that we did is, having spent so much time with our customers, we really sort of got to the place where we began to realize that there's a consistent communication path that we wanted to have with them, again, defining various vehicles. And that has allowed us to really get to the point, because we can assess now, I would say probably less than 10% of the customer conversations I have with the customers are about anything incident related. It's more about the future and the investments we're making in passwordless, and what is our view on how the authentication market is evolving.
Okay. We're running out of time, but before I let you go, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about what your reaction is to some of these new SEC regulations and some of the regulations coming down the pipe, which seem to just keep ratcheting up the pressure on CEOs in particular to get it right and get it right fast.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think in general, I think they're headed in the right direction. I think CEOs need to take this topic very seriously. As I said to you earlier, from the boardroom on down, it's why we were very fortunate to bring John Stewart as an independent on the board, who's a cyber expert that can be a voice in the room other than the CEO. But I would say that while I think they're headed in the right direction, I think that while the CEO and the CISO are certainly responsible for the execution and the delivery of a secure product to the broader market and the things that are attributed to that, I also think there's a little bit of a miss in terms of making sure that that goes all the way up to the board, and then there's better governance and guidance around ensuring that you have, especially for sizable organizations, independent board member that's an expert in the space of cyber. This issue has become such a prominent topic. And only in retrospect do you begin to understand that there should be some form of governance outside of the execution and management team. And I think there's a really important discourse that the SEC and others should be having in that area.
Wonderful.
Yep.
I very much appreciate your time, and I appreciate your remarks. It's been invaluable for me and for our audience, I know.
My pleasure.
Thank you so
Okay,
much for
Becky.
joining us.